Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Radical Candor podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
I'm Amy Sandler. And Kim, you're recording this right now. I believe you're in Austin, Texas. Is that right?
Yes, I am in Austin, Texas. I am in my college roommate's husband's man cave. That is where I am right now.
College roommates. There's a lot of apostrophes
There's a
there.
lot of apostrophes in there, but it's lovely here in the man cave.
I'm so glad to hear. And you went to Austin for South by Southwest. This is, we're in March 2024.
I did indeed. And Wesley Faulkner, the Radical Respect my Radical Respect podcast host, longtime South by Southwest attender, got us a talk, and we announced the launch of Radical Respect. It was really cool and exciting and fun.
Great. Well, I can't wait to hear about that with the launch of Radical Respect and what you and Wesley focused on during your podcast, as well as noting that folks will probably be hearing some of those podcast episodes in our feed drop while we're talking about South by Southwest. And by the way, are people calling it now South by? Is that the latest and greatest? What I'm seeing Nick is nodding. I remember there was a shift from South by Southwest, and then apparently we all just got so tired we just called it South by.
This time when I called it South by, people looked at me like I was old school. I think we're back to South by Southwest. Okay. I think so, yeah. But maybe I was misinterpreting their look. It's possible. As we have discussed, we are likely to misinterpret facial expressions and body language.
Yes, we are. Well, back in the day when I attended South by Southwest, there were a couple of highlights. One is I went on a morning walk with Diana Nyad, but I also ended up on an all-night search for Grumpy Cat, which
looks like it was a successful search.
And I think it was a successful search. We may need to follow up with that in the show notes. Jason, have you been to South by?
I have not. I have never been. I've been to Austin, but not during South by Southwest.
So Kim is going to give us a peek behind the scene, although, Kim, is it safe to say that when you go to conferences, you might not be the best on-site reporter of what actually happened at the conference? Is that a safe?
Yes, that is safe. That is a safe guess. Given my preference, as we all know, I'd rather be sitting in my garage writing at all times. Although I always love the conversations I have and the people I meet. It's not that I'm not a grumpy cat. Exactly. But I do say the first time I ever went to a tech conference was right after 9/11. And I was living in New York at the time, and I hadn't left. And I went, I think it was TED. I think it was a TED conference. And there were all kinds of incredible talks, but all I wanted to do was sit by the ocean and I was reading, because I didn't listen to books then. Now I do. I was reading Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah. And so I would go to one session, and then I would go read Man's Search for Meaning. And then I would go to another session, and then I'd go write in my journal. And that is the way I like to do conferences. So for South by Southwest, I went to I spoke twice, which was really exciting. But then I would leave and go have a lovely brunch with my two college roommates. And then I'd go back, and then I'd leave and have a lovely dinner with my two college roommates. So I used it as a great opportunity to catch up with old friends, as well as to meet some new people, as well as to launch my book.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we'll spend most of our time talking about Radical Respect and learn a bit about what you and Wesley shared on your podcast. But one of the things, before we get into it, just talking about conferences, I certainly used to spend a lot of my time at conferences, speaking and participating. Jason, you probably haven't been to a conference in a few years. Is that a safe guess?
I think I presented at a conference in 2019, but I haven't been to anything that I would consider a conference. I haven't voluntarily attended a conference in much longer than that. Like I haven't sought one out in a very long time.
What is the opposite of voluntarily attending a conference?
Well, I think
for work
I was
sometimes.
Yes, I was compelled to attend a conference because I was working there.
But you weren't compelled. I mean, you chose to do it.
Well,
but you didn't pay to go to a conference.
That's correct.
You get paid to go to conferences.
That's correct. Yes, that's true.
And I do think we have another participant in the podcast for today. So Kim, you are in Austin. Jason, you are also, you've set up shop in Northern California right now, and you've brought a friend. Do you want to just share? You might hear this additional participant to the pod.
Jack is here today. You can hear him making his little noises in the background because he's frustrated that he can hear other dogs having a good time outside while he is stuck inside with me.
Which for some people might be their version of being at a conference. You know, it seems like everyone's at South by Southwest having the time of their lives, but in some cases, some of those dogs may not wish to be there in the thick of it. I will just say, and then Kim will get into Radical Respect. The last really big conference that I was due to go to was being held by Zendesk, and I was going to be talking about Radical Candor, and this was in March of 2020. And I had rearranged my schedule. I was at the Newark Airport Marriott giving a talk to a large cosmetics company about Radical Candor. And I was just about to fly to Miami for this conference. And I changed my schedule because there was an event with Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach. And this was going to be the moment when I was going to commence the great friendship that has yet to occur. And this slight pandemic really threw a wrench.
Got in the way.
It got in the way.
So many plans derailed.
So many plans. So we've learned to adjust. We've learned to be resilient. Kim, you're back at South by Southwest, launching Radical Respect. So first of all, how did it feel to talk about Radical Respect?
It felt great. I mean, I always love every conversation I ever have with Wesley Faulkner. So big shout out to him. And we got so many incredible questions from the audience. People shared their stories. People came up afterwards and wanted to talk a lot about the book. So, my hope with Radical Respect, much like my hope with Radical Candor, is to paint a picture of what things can be like and to offer some practical, tactical tips on how to get there. And maybe tell some stories that are painful but relatable and sometimes even funny about what goes wrong and how to help it go right. And both Wesley and I had a number of stories that about experiences we had either being on the receiving end of bias, prejudice, and bullying, or sometimes being on the giving end of bias, prejudice, and bullying, and also of upstanders and leaders who did the right thing in the face of these events to move us towards radical respect. So it was really, it was fun. It was inspiring. Wesley always has just incredible stories. So I enjoyed it, and it's good. It really is energizing to, it's one thing to write a book sitting alone. I always say the second hardest thing about writing is getting into one's head, but the hardest thing is getting back out. And that's one of the things that a great conference can do for one, is to help one get back out of one's own head. And so I really enjoyed it. The thing I would say that is really, and another speaker mentioned this as well, who I was chatting with before Wesley and I went on. One of the things that is really different about South by Southwest is that everyone in the audience is rooting for you as a speaker. She contrasted it. This speaker contrasted it with going to speak at like World Economic Forum or something like that, where often the audience is sitting there judging you and wanting to prove that they are smarter than you. That's not the vibe at South by. It's very much we're coming together in solidarity to help each other out. And that is great to see. I think this is a year where we need to come together in solidarity to help each other out.
That's so interesting. I love that reflection. And it makes me think that's so much the spirit of Radical Candor, which is that we are sharing our perspective to be helpful, that we are not coming at the other person from that place of criticism and judgment. And it feels like culturally, this feels, to your point, how can we create more of that thoughtful curiosity and helpfulness, even if someone is saying something that we might disagree with, but really to share our perspective in a way that's helpful. And I'm wondering, when that other speaker shared that, was there a way that you specifically could feel that was the way the audience was showing up for you?
Absolutely. I mean, the questions were so warm and engaging, and the the laughter in the audience. Like, I looked out, and everybody, when you're speaking on stage, especially, it was a room for 600 people, so it was kind of a big stage, which is always slightly terrifying, no matter how many times you do it. And when you always try to look at one person in the eye and look at another person in the eye. You're trying to connect with individual people in an audience. And sometimes they're like scowling or they're on their phones, and everybody there was like big smile, but, encouraging eyes. You really feel it as a speaker. And that's one of the great things about speaking in front of a live audience. It's harder to notice that when you're speaking over Zoom or something, because usually people, out of respect, turn their cameras off while you're speaking. But then you're talking to the green dot on your computer. It gives you a little less encouragement than all the. Even if I'm misinterpreting the facial expressions, I felt love, rightly or wrongly.
Your TED Talk on Radical Candor just recently came out.
Yes.
As well, and the actual TED Talk. So,
right, not the thing that everybody calls the
TED thing. Talk. Like, there's a thing that people call the TED Talk.
To be clear, it was the TEDx Portland talk that got posted on TED.com.
Okay, thank you. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I quickly clicked on it, and I noticed that you started the talk with a different story at the top than what I have typically heard. And as you were just sharing about Radical Respect, it got me thinking, like, how did you start Radical Respect, that talk? And what made you want to change the intro of the Radical Candor TEDx talk?
So Wesley started the Radical Respect talk, and he said something, and he told a story about an incident from his career, and he said this is what he said to me when he first wrote to me, when I first sort of quote unquote met Wesley. He said, "After I read your book, I realized that I was not a broken person. I was a human being in a broken system, and that we could fix these systems."
Wow.
And so that was how we started. I mean, not we. That was how Wesley started the talk. And I loved what he said. It was so beautifully said. So that was how we started that one. I just was trying to come at, when I did the talk at TEDx Portland, I wanted to focus really on the problems of ruinous empathy, and also to get to how we can use radical candor to create a less polarized world. So it was a different kind of focus of that talk. How did it land for you, Amy and Jason?
It landed great. And just for folks who might not have seen it, and we'll put it in the show notes, you started by talking about when you were, I think it was 1999, and you were running a tech company.
Yeah.
And everyone was sharing this article with you about how people would much rather work for managers who were jerks rather than people who were nice but didn't actually get anything done and didn't give you any feedback. I might be mischaracterizing.
Yeah, jerks, but really competent jerks was the
jerks, but really competent jerks.
Yeah, that was the
but
caveat.
Really competent jerks. And it got you thinking, like, are those my only choices?
Yeah.
Like, am I a jerk, or am I just really nice but totally incompetent?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that is a false dichotomy that a lot of us fall prey to. And sort of one of the things I was trying to break free from when I wrote Radical Candor. And also, I think one of the things that we need to break free from now in order to challenge people, but to do so with real caring, with our humanity intact. I think we feel like we have to choose right now between being incredibly cruel when we question what someone has said, and being able to question kindly. And I think we need to do more kind questioning in this environment that we find ourselves in. By the way, can I go back to one other thing I noticed at South by Southwest?
Please.
One of the other, and actually I didn't know this. I was there, as I mentioned, with my 2 college roommates. And a bunch of people came up and said, like, at different points, we'd be walking down a hall and somebody would come up and say, "Oh, or did you write Radical Candor?" And then they would talk about how they were rolling it out in their company. And my college roommate, who has Caroline Wright, who has a great talent for naming things, said, "What do you call your fans? Do you call them Candidos?" I said, I'd never thought about that, but that's one that's one thing. So if you're listening to this, you can tell us how you feel about the term Candidos. But I think that it was really fun to hear stories from the real world about how Radical Candor is playing out in people's careers and in their lives. And it made me think, again, Jason and I have talked about this, and Amy, you and I, and Brandy and Nick just started talking about the possibility of having a Radical Candor retreat. So what do you think, Jason, that would look like? Amy, what do you all think that might look like? And if you're listening to this right now, write to us and tell us what you think. Is this a bad idea or is this a good idea?
I noticed that you called it a retreat and not a conference.
Yes. So my idea for the way I would want to structure it is I would want to be free all day long to go. I'd want to do it someplace where I could swim, ideally Hawaii. And not just swim, where I could snorkel and see fish and rays and octopi and coral. And so I would want to have my day free until 5:30, and then we would do a session from 5:30 until 7, and then people could have dinner together, or if they wanted to bring their spouse, they could have dinner with their spouse. Like, no forced bonding. And mostly it would be a retreat. There would be free time, but we would come together at the end of every day, and it would probably be like 45 minutes of conversation, 45 minutes of content, something like that. But is that a good or a bad?
No, that was an acknowledgement. It was not a judgment.
Okay.
I was acknowledging what you're saying because I think there is a tendency for people to want, when they do these sort of professional, the conferences and retreats, there's a tendency to want to like fit as much stuff into that experience as possible, like as much professional stuff into that experience as possible. But over the weekend I saw a study that shows that this is one of the first times I've studied this, but like for 2-year-olds, they remember something much better if they sleep shortly after they learn it.
Yes.
Oh, finally the science is catching up.
And I was thinking about that, which is like, in order to integrate new ideas, we our brains need to rest. Like they need to sort of like sit. We need to sit with the idea, and it's sort of interesting because it puts a lot more pressure on those 90-minute conversations. Like you want something to be really curated and really, really good. But at the same time, I feel like it also prevents the problem of needing to get filler in there. It's like, oh, what are we going to do? We don't have anything between 1 and 2. So like, let's squeeze something in there. And I find that often is what winds up making conferences feel, feel unfun is that you wind up at some point over your, couple of days feeling like you're just doing something to do it, as opposed to because you think it's actually good or interesting.
Or even, so I described at the beginning my first experience at TED, and every single session. Then this was I guess 2001, or maybe it was it was right after 9/11, probably 2002, early 2002. Every single session was incredible. Like, I wanted to go to all of them. There was no filler there, but my brain was full after one of them. Like, I needed to go. Like, I remember going to listen to the session on memes. I had never heard about what a meme was, and finding it so exciting and interesting. But I couldn't, and I wanted to go to the next session, but I realized I couldn't, like, I mean, so I guess maybe other people who go to those conferences have bigger brains than I do, or a better capacity to, but I find I need, like, when I was writing Radical Candor, I would write for an hour and a half, and then I would take a 3-hour walk. And then I would come back and write for an hour. And I remember occasionally I'd like bump into people in these open space preserves that are, all throughout Silicon Valley where I live. And I could tell they always felt sorry for me because I was alone walking around. But like, that was what I needed to do. Yeah. And so maybe I'm mapping my own needs onto everybody with the way I'm thinking about the retreat. I don't know, Amy, what would you want from a Radical Candor retreat?
From my perspective, it's almost about, is it a retreat or is it a conference? So because those are, I think, two very different experiences. And from my perspective, a retreat would be a chance for you to really kind of go deep onto the concepts, not so much in that 1 hour, 90 minutes, but really in the rest of the time and doing the things that really fill people up. So for you, it might be, snorkeling. And for me, it might be doing some breath work and a little bit of, time in the water, and maybe some, group creative expression. There might be different ways that people access that spaciousness. There's a spaciousness in what you're talking about in a retreat. And so I think that's the invitation, is that what makes it a Radical Candor retreat is that it's spacious.
Yeah, you can do whatever the hell you want all day long. Like, I'm not talking about dragging everybody.
You're not curating everyone for snorkeling at 9:30.
In fact, I don't want to snorkel with 45 others. No. Like, I go snorkeling all by myself usually. And I respect the fact that, my kids and Andy do not want to snorkel with me when we go on vacation. Like, and they allow me to go snorkel without giving me a hard time about snorkeling for 4 hours. And I think for me, that's what I want, is a bunch of time for people to do whatever fills them up. And if we need to offer some things, that's fine. Some other things.
Because I could see a world where people that are more extroverted, what might fill them up is actually is that time and stimulation and ideas. Yeah. So I think there could be people, whether it's about sort of more introversion, extroversion of like what fills you up. And then there's also, is it about new ideas, or is it actually about putting those ideas into practice, right? So is it about, I got this idea and now I'm going to actually try it out in the next day?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think I like, sometimes I want a vacation, and Hawaii is a lovely place to have a vacation. And I think sometimes what I want is to like move some idea or project or something else forward. And I think what you're both describing is like different ways of supporting people's ability to do that. And one interesting way to think about the retreat would be to have, since it would have to be, by necessity, it would have to be kind of on the small side. We couldn't have 1,000 people at this retreat. I don't think it would work as well. I think we'd want the retreat to be on the small side. I think it'd be interesting to have like an intention or a goal for each one. So like, Amy, to your point, one might be, there are a lot of people out there who are leaders in their organization, and they're thinking about, how do I help build a culture of Radical Candor at my company? Mm-hmm. And as opposed to like an implementation type of conference, like one theme that would support that would be, how do I, demonstrate, how do I show people what it looks like to be a radically candid leader? And then each session, like each day, could help people sort of think about that in a different way. And you don't need to overprogram the rest of the time. But to Amy's point, then you create, by having that intention or goal, which attracts a group of people who have some similar objective, it makes it a lot easier for folks to self-organize and say, like, I would like to go hike or snorkel or whatever.
Yeah.
And some other people to say, like, bike, whatever it is. And some other people to say, I would love to brainstorm. Like, I want to spend an hour with some people just like brainstorming ideas of ways that I could do this. That I think having that shared objective could be a really interesting, and making it sort of broad enough that it's not, you don't feel like it's a programmed, like, I'm using the word program in too many ways. It's a predetermined pathway, but instead it's sort of like a shared goal at the other end.
Yeah, there are choices that are truly choices. You're not pressured to do
correct.
One thing or
Correct.
Another.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think it would be a unique type of offering, and for Radical Candor, especially for reflecting on how to become the type of leader that embodies Radical Candor. I do think you don't get there by sitting in a classroom 8 hours a day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's just not the way to get there.
Yeah. I think also, maybe it's a reward for people who are recognized as really great managers, best managers to work for. And so it's, you're learning something, but it's also, a way for your company to give you a week to have a retreat, and that, it's interesting. Part of the way that I was thinking about this comes from my father-in-law, was a doctor, and he talked about when you're a doctor, you have to do continuing ed, I think once a year, once every 2 years. I'm not sure how often, but and so the doctors would schedule these incredible retreats, and they had to go to some number of classes. The way they did it was they woke up early and they were all done by 11, and then they had the rest of the day. I would rather sleep in and do it at the end of the day, but that's just,
I'll have the other track. I'll have the morning track, and then we'll
you'll have the morning track and I'll have the night track. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I just like to sleep in. So anyway, I think there's something, and people tend to write those kinds of events off as like boondoggles. And certainly they can be just boondoggles. But there's probably some terrible etymology to the word. Anyway, if there is, please somebody wave a purple flag. But it is, I think there's something to that. Like, I remember when I had the summer internship at McKinsey, it's kind of absurd, but because it was a 10-week internship between my 2 years at business school. One of those weeks you went to Aspen, and you could bring a significant other, and mostly you got to do fun stuff. You could choose, like, where are you going to go biking or hiking or whatever. But it actually was like, that was the week that I really understood McKinsey and the culture and what they were trying to do better than any other. Like, it was actually productive. It was fun, but it was also productive.
To Jason, your point about the brainstorming, like, for me, if I'm in a beautiful place and I have spaciousness and I had some content, then having lunch and brainstorming about ideas is actually very nourishing for me.
Yes.
Like, it really like fills me up. Whereas for someone else, and I know Brandy does not like the word nourishing, so I wish I could throw a purple flag on myself for that. Apologies.
I happen, thanks to I happen to have one, right?
Oh, you have one. Thank you.
I brought it all the way to Austin.
Oh, that's so great. So I find it very restoring, but for someone else, like, they might not want to, brainstorming might be very draining. And so I think
I will still be snorkeling.
Yeah.
While you're
and I'll be just like having ideas and throwing ideas. Right. So I think there's something about, it's almost like there's enough of a container and structure so that the spaciousness can occur, whatever will fill each person up.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, enough brainstorming about the retreat, I think.
All right.
Let's add some spaciousness.
Let's go snorkeling. Yeah, let's add
to
some
this conversation so that we can let it percolate.
Well, and I'd also love to talk about another thing that I talked about at South by Southwest, which was the wonderful book, Mentorship Unlocked, The Science and Art of Setting Yourself Up for Success. Janice Omedeki, who is a colleague of a guy who I went to business school with, who introduced Janice and me, she invited me to share the stage with her to talk about her book, which is just fantastic. I can't recommend this book highly enough, because I think that mentorship has been such an important part of my ability to have a successful and enjoyable career. And yet it's tricky. It's like, it's so hard to figure out how to find those mentors. And Janice is a Black woman, and she was actually in defense for a long time. And so it was much harder for her than it was for me to find mentors. But it's tricky, no matter who you are, to figure out how this mentorship thing works. And I think this book really will help everyone figure out how to find great mentors for their career.
Was there a tip or two, Kim, that really sort of leapt out at you for someone who's thinking, I'm sitting in this panel with Kim and Janice talking about mentorship. This is the one next thing that I really want to do after having learned about that or checked out the book. What would I do to find a mentor if I don't currently have one?
Janice breaks it. One of the great things about Janice's book is that she breaks it down into, like, there's 7 different kinds of mentors that you can have. And so that I always find that kind of structure really helpful. As I joked with her, I was like, well, my first mentor I chose because he was reading a novel I loved. And I thought I could talk to him about it. So there's different ways. We both talked about different ways to approach people. But I think that, and sort of figuring out if you want something that's more formal or if you just want to ask a person a question in the moment. But I think that one of the people in the audience asked a question, and I think this was really a helpful and clarifying question for everyone, because this person asked, how can I quickly impress this person who is going to be my mentor? And both Janice and I said, you can let go of that. Like, if a person is going to be a mentor, they want to help you. And so the best thing you can do is to tell them as quickly and efficiently what you need. And if they can give it to you quickly and efficiently, that is awesome. Like, skip the cup of coffee and just get right to the ask.
That's really helpful. And Jason, I'm curious, from your own experience, what have you found is a helpful or effective way for folks to ask to be mentors? Whichever one of the 7 areas. And we'll put in the show notes the book.
From my perspective, one of the things that stops mentorship relationships from forming is maybe an overemphasis on defining the relationship itself. So not only the initial ask, but like a lot of people, when they're asking for mentorship, think like, oh, should I ask for a meeting, like once every other week, or like how like they're worried about the mechanics of mentorship. And one of the things that I have learned over time is that sometimes the ask, especially if the person is motivated to help you and you're asking them interesting questions, meaning like a question that requires them to think, like for a lot of people, me included, that's often enough to get me to offer my time freely. And so I guess what I'm saying is, don't burden don't front load the relationship logistics into that initial mentorship conversation. Like, have an interesting discussion with that person, make what you need really clear to them, and then be open to listening to them. I think the flip side of mentorship is that it taps into like an innate human need, like you asking someone for help and then like genuinely curiously listening to them. That's a gift. Like, you're also giving them something, which is like to allow them to sort of like sit in their expertise and share their perspective, and listen to them fully be present and listen to them with curiosity. It is a thing that you're giving. So the relationship is really two-way. I know everybody sort of says that, but I wanted to try to describe what is two-way about a mentorship relationship. There's the satisfaction of helping somebody else, but there's also the like human relational element of really being listened to, which is the gift that you give in return.
Yeah,
That is really well said.
It is. I'm trying to think of, I might mess up the story, but it was this idea of someone who had a next door neighbor, and they were definitely not as well off as the person that was sort of the subject of the story. And they said to one of their children, if they could go over and ask the neighbor for some sugar. And the idea was that, everyone wants to help. And this was something that neighbor could do, rather than feeling like they were always coming over to them and asking for help. And so it is that idea that I think as humans, we are wired to want to be helpful. We are wired to want to be reciprocal and caring. I mean, Kim, it really goes back to what you were saying about the generosity of that audience at South by Southwest, of just, how can I be helpful? And sometimes giving someone a chance to help you
Yes.
can actually give them a boost. And I think especially, just thinking about getting on the other side of age in the workplace. Kim, we talked about how we went sort of overnight from being the young person at work to
Yes.
the old person at work. And,
Yes.
like people really, like, I would love to be asked, hey, how did you think about this? People really do like to share their perspective, whether it's, it might not always be as relevant, but I think giving someone a chance to mentor and share perspective can be a gift, especially if somebody might feel like what they have to offer might not be as valued. And Kim, I just thought, since you value efficiency, is there any outreach? You get so many. I think the story you shared about Wesley reaching out with, realizing I'm not a broken person, I'm a human being in a broken system, which really just leapt out at me. Whether it was that outreach, any other one that has leapt out at you is like, wow, this person really kind of drew me in. And this, like, what was was there a specific ask in what Wesley did when he reached out to you, or anyone else who you may have ended up coaching or mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Wesley has mentored me more than I've mentored him. No, he was just reaching out to say thank you for writing the book, and what he explained really leapt out at me and meant a lot to me. I think that I will say, this makes me sound so curmudgeonly, but often people say, I would love to get a cup of coffee with you. I'd love to get a 15 minutes is like, I so feel bad about saying no to that, because it seems like so little to ask. But if I said yes to all of them, like I would be neglecting my kids or my writing, or, and so I think that what I really appreciate is if someone wants an introduction to someone else, they'll say, they'll just get straight to the point. And if I can do it, and it takes 30 seconds, I'm much more likely to do it than if you want me to spend 15 minutes having coffee until you tell me what you really want. So tell me what you really want. And if I can give it to you, I will. And if I can't, I won't. And I may miss the email. I apologize if you send it, but I'll try to. I do really try to respond.
Well, I think the Wesley story, and it might be fun to have the both of you on the podcast and share about your relationship, but that he reached out in a way of just truly thanking you for you sharing the book and him sharing your perspective, and look at where that outreach went, right? Maybe even without an idea of where it would go.
Well, he certainly, I had no idea that Ernest was the previous co-host of the podcast, that Ernest was about to get hired to lead DEI at Ford Motor Company and not have time to do it anymore. And Wesley had such great stories and also such great contacts in the industry that he has just been a fantastic co-host. So I've learned tremendously from him. I think he's as much a mentor to me as vice versa.
The busier someone, it seems counterintuitive, but the busier someone is, like getting to the point, like getting to the ask quickly, the more helpful that actually is to them.
Yes.
So I think there's definitely something to learn from that. The other thing that I would say is that sometimes there are more informal ways to learn from potential mentors. for example, maybe you're working at a company with someone who has a particular skill that you think is particularly skilled or would be a good mentor to you. There may be occasions where that person is sort of like presenting information or talking about a decision that they've made or whatever else. And maybe you're on another team that wouldn't normally get invited, but a really low effort ask is to say, hey, I'm curious to learn more about this. Would it be okay if I sat in just to hear the discussion? To get to so I could be there for your point of view. Or if you're recording the meeting, could I watch a recording of it? And that was a kind of mentorship that we did a lot of inside of Khan Academy, was this sort of like somewhat more informal mentorship. And the way that we accomplished it was we had a practice of making like all mailing lists. So like all like group email lists, and all meeting recordings were basically publicly available, and they were stored in a particular way, which allowed people to get the benefit of someone else's perspective without asking a ton from their time. And I'll tell you that it's far more interesting to someone if you can say like, hey, in the team meeting, you mentioned this piece of technology that I'm really interested in learning about. I'm wondering if you could point me in the direction of like a way that I could learn more about that. Or if you've got some advice, I'm just getting started, learning that new technology. Do you have any advice for me of where I could start? So like starting with something like that the person is doing, and using that as a way in is also really, really useful. And you can get at that if you look for these sort of more informal ways to start the relationship, like by tagging along or watching something that the person you wish to get mentored by has produced and asking questions about it.
Really helpful tips. Kim, before we close, I want to go back to Radical Respect and the launch. I want to get in your own words the word respect and the different meanings of it, and why you chose that as the frame for Radical Respect.
So there are two definitions of respect. The first is sort of honor you're giving, admiration you're giving to someone's skills. And that is something a person has to earn over time by demonstrating those skills. But the second definition, which is the one I'm talking about when I say radical respect, is something that we owe to everyone. We owe everyone we encounter basic regard for their humanity, for their feelings, for their traditions. And that is, I think, kind of the prequel to Radical Candor. If you cannot offer someone that kind of basic fundamental respect, then you're not going to care about them and you're not going to bother challenging them directly.
So well said. And again, it feels like that was really the spirit that you encountered at South by Southwest in the audience.
Yes, it was a radically respectful conference. That is a good point. It really was. It was fun.
Great. Well, on that note, hoping that we have more conferences, retreats, unconferences, and more radically respectful workplaces. Now it's time for our Radical Candor checklist. Tips you can use to start putting radical candor into practice.
Tip number 1, if you go to a conference and if you are an introvert like me, feel free to skip some sessions and get the alone time you need. You don't have to do it all. You can just choose a couple of sessions, enjoy them, and then go lie in your hotel room and read if that's what you want to do.
Tip number 2, when approaching a mentor, let go of the need to impress. Just make the ask, and the more specific, the more clear, the more targeted for a busy person, that is what will be most helpful for them. Little Jerry Maguire, help them help you.
Tip number 3, get a copy of Mentorship Unlocked. If you feel like mentorship is something that you need and you're having trouble figuring out how to get it, this book is really going to help you figure out how to take the first steps in the direction of unlocking that relationship, which is going to help you grow.
And if you feel like you don't need mentorship, definitely buy Mentorship Unlocked because we all need it. Tip number 4, please pre-order Radical Respect. I spent 4 long, lonely years writing it, and I think it'll be really helpful for you. So enjoy it.
And Kim, how about listening to the Radical Respect podcast?
Yes, we're going to be dropping episodes of the Radical Respect podcast right into this feed. So we're going to make it really easy for you to do that.
All right. And before we close, it seems important, thank you, Brandy, about the origin of boondoggle. In the 1920s, Robert Link, a scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts of America, apparently coined the word to name the braided leather cords made and worn by scouts. The word came to prominence when such a boondoggle was presented to the Prince of Wales at the 1929 World Jamboree. It's been with us ever since. Over time, it developed the additional sense describing a wasteful or impractical project. Well, hopefully you're still listening to this project of ours, this podcast episode, and show
I'm
notes.
just going to say, I love me a good boondoggle. Can be productive.
It can. We're reframing. Show notes are at radicalcandor.com/podcast. Praise in public and private, criticize in private. So go ahead if you like what you're hearing, rate and review us where you're listening to the podcast. Criticism, please go ahead, email it to podcast@radicalcandor.com. We do read everyone and we really appreciate it.
Bye now. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye. The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.